The studio lights hit like a flare, bouncing off the polished desk between them. The air was already heavy before the first question landed, and the cameras had barely started rolling. The host hadn't even finished his opening line when Trump leaned forward with that trademark smirk, ready to dominate the room as he always did. But before he could even finish his first sentence, Denzel cut in, his voice sharp, his timing surgical. "Don't start with your slogans tonight," Denzel said, tone steady but fierce. "Because the truth is simple, you're not a leader. You're a disaster." The words cracked across the studio like a whip. The audience gasped, some clapped impulsively, and for the first time, Trump's expression faltered. He tried to laugh it off, waving a dismissive hand, but the tremor in his jaw betrayed the hit. "Excuse me?" Trump fired back, voice rising. "Disaster? I built this country's strongest economy. Everybody knows it. You, Denzel, you're an actor. You read lines. I lead nations." Denzel leaned back slightly, but his eyes burned forward, refusing to blink. He wasn't here to play calm Hollywood diplomat, he was here to strike. "Lead? You don't lead, you manipulate. You don't serve the people, you serve yourself. A leader takes responsibility. A disaster hides behind excuses. And that's what you've done your entire career, dodge blame while America paid the price." The host tried to intervene, but the crowd wasn't quiet. Murmurs turned into audible whispers, the tension was electric. Trump straightened in his chair, his face reddening. "Don't lecture me on leadership. You don't know what it takes. You've never been in the Oval Office." Denzel leaned in now, closing the gap, voice low but booming through the silence. "I don't have to sit in your chair to recognize failure when I see it. And make no mistake, America did too." The room froze. For the first time in the night, Trump wasn't smiling. His fists clenched on the desk, and the cameras caught it all. Trump leaned forward, his voice sharper now, trying to drown out the echoes of Denzel's line. "You sit there, pretending like you know what it takes. But when I was in charge, the world respected America. Gas was cheap, the stock market was booming, and people weren't afraid of chaos every time they walked outside. That's leadership." The crowd responded with scattered applause, mostly from his supporters planted in the front rows. Trump smirked again, reclaiming some ground. He raised his chin as if the argument was already settled. But Denzel didn't flinch. His silence was more dangerous than any outburst. Then, slowly, he broke it. "Respect?" he asked, his tone deliberate. "The world didn't respect us, they pitted us. They watched a man who treated the highest office like a personal stage, turning policy into reality TV. America doesn't need a showman, it needs a statesman. And the truth is, you never learned the difference." The studio rumbled with reaction. Trump's eyes narrowed. "You think you're smarter than the American people? They voted for me because I gave them results. You, Denzel, you've never had to sign a bill, negotiate with foreign leaders, or protect this nation from threats." Denzel leaned forward, his voice cutting through Trump's defensiveness like glass. "And yet, I've spent my life protecting something you never understood, integrity. When people look at you, they don't see protection. They see division. They see a man who breaks trust for power. Leadership isn't measured in applause or polls, it's measured in what remains after the applause fades. And what did you leave behind? A trail of anger, corruption, and fear." The host's eyes darted nervously between them, but the audience was locked in. Phones were already up, recording, knowing this moment was viral fuel. Trump pounded the desk once with his palm. "That's a lie. Everything you just said is a lie," he barked, his voice cracking under the weight of his frustration. Denzel didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head, calm but searing. "If it were a lie, Mr. Trump, you wouldn't be shouting. You'd be proving me wrong. But you can't. Because deep down, even you know, disasters don't defend, they explode." The words landed, and for the second time that night, Trump had no immediate comeback. The camera zoomed in tight on Trump's face, flushed, jaw stiff, eyes darting toward the host as if begging for rescue. But no rescue came. The audience had shifted. Even those who had cheered him minutes earlier now sat upright, waiting to see how this clash unfolded. It was no longer entertainment, it was a reckoning. Trump jabbed his finger across the table at Denzel. You think you can talk down to me? You think because you've played heroes on a screen that you know what a real hero looks like? Let me tell you something, I put America first. Always have, always will. And people loved me for it. The room filled with uneasy applause. But Denzel didn't clap back. He leaned forward slowly, folding his hands, his voice lowering to a sharp edge that cut deeper than shouting ever could. You put America first? No. You put yourself first. America was a prop, the flag was your backdrop, the people were your ratings. Heroes don't chase applause, Mr. Trump. Heroes sacrifice. And the only thing you ever sacrificed was truth. The line stung like a blade. The crowd erupted, half gasping, half cheering. Trump's lips tightened. He tried to smirk but failed. Instead, he barked out, fake news. Same old garbage. You don't know the pressure, the responsibility. I ran this country better than anyone before me. Denzel's reply came instantly, without hesitation. Pressure doesn't excuse corruption. Responsibility doesn't excuse division. And running the country? You didn't run it, you fractured it. You left Americans turning on each other while you watched from the sidelines, calling it strength. That's not leadership. That's cowardice dressed as pride. The words echoed. A woman in the audience shouted, "Say it again." Phones caught every second. Clips were already being stitched for social media before the conversation even ended. Trump slammed his fist down on the desk, his voice shaking with anger. You have no idea what it's like to be me. Denzel's eyes narrowed, calm but unrelenting. And you have no idea what it's like to truly serve. That's why history won't remember you as a leader. It'll remember you as the disaster I just called you. The crowd roared. And for the first time, Trump sat back, visibly rattled, hands gripping the edges of the desk like a man losing control of the very stage he thought he owned. The tension in the studio felt like static electricity, every second charged, waiting for the spark that would ignite it. Trump leaned back in his chair, forcing a smirk, trying to recapture control. You're an actor, Denzel. A good one, sure. But don't confuse playing heroes with living reality. You don't understand the deals, the negotiations, the enemies I had to stare down. That takes guts. That takes leadership. Denzel's gaze stayed locked, unshaken. His voice was calm but carried the weight of a hammer. Leadership isn't about photo ops with dictators or handshakes that make headlines. It's about what you do when no one's watching. And when no one was watching, you were lining your pockets, silencing critics, and tearing apart the very democracy you swore to protect. The audience gasped. Trump's face stiffened, his hands gripping the desk harder now. That's slander, he barked. I gave this country 4 years of strength. The economy, the military, the borders, everything was better under me. But Denzel didn't blink. He leaned in closer, voice dropping lower, sharper. Better? Ask the families who lost everything while you bragged about markets. Ask the soldiers who felt abandoned while you praised strongmen overseas. Ask the working class who realized their pain was just your stage prop. You call that strength? I call it betrayal. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause and shouts. Trump tried to speak over it, his voice cracking, that's a lie. A total lie. But his words were swallowed by the roar of the audience. For the first time, the cameras captured not a commanding former president, but a man visibly flustered, trapped in a corner he couldn't shout his way out of. Denzel sat back, unshaken, his blazer perfectly still, his composure the very opposite of Trump's unraveling. He let the silence stretch, knowing sometimes the absence of words stings louder than any insult. Then he delivered the final blow of the exchange. You mistake noise for power. But noise fades. Truth doesn't. The line hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Even the host, who had been nervously shifting in his seat, froze. The studio was no longer divided. It was captivated. Locked in the moment where one man's fury collided with another's unshakable truth. Trump's knuckles tapped nervously on the desk, each hollow knock echoing through the studio like a countdown. His eyes darted to the cameras, then back at Denzel, desperate to find an angle, a lifeline. You sit there acting righteous, but you never had to make the tough calls. You never had the weight of a nation on your shoulders. It's easy to criticize when you're playing pretend for applause. Denzel didn't flinch. His calm was unnerving, like a storm waiting to break. Pretend, he said, his tone sharp, cutting. Pretend is selling people dreams you never intended to deliver. Pretend is promising the forgotten worker salvation, then cashing in while they suffered. Pretend is telling America you cared, while every move screamed you only cared about yourself. That's not leadership, Mr. Trump. That's performance. And unlike me, your performance cost real lives. The words landed like thunder. A few gasps broke through the silence, followed by an eruption of claps and shouts. Trump's jaw tightened, his face redder by the second. He pointed across the table, voice shaking with fury. Don't you lecture me about sacrifice. I gave up more than you'll ever understand. I fought the media, the establishment, the entire corrupt machine. Denzel leaned forward, his voice dropping low but carrying an iron edge. You didn't fight corruption. You became it. You didn't drain the swamp, you built a throne in the middle of it. And the worst part? You convinced good people to believe in your act, while you cashed in on their loyalty. That isn't bravery. That's betrayal. The audience was on their feet now, some cheering wildly, others stunned into silence. The host looked like he wanted to intervene, but he knew better. This was history unfolding live, and cutting it short would only fuel the fire. Trump slammed his fist on the desk, the sound booming across the studio. You think you're better than me? You think Hollywood speeches make you a savior? Denzel's reply came swift, cold, final. I don't need to be a savior. I just refuse to be a fraud. And that's the difference between you and me. The crowd exploded. Phones shot up, clips already destined to dominate social media. And Trump, the man who thrived on spectacle, sat there, rattled, realizing the spectacle was no longer his to control. The studio was boiling with noise, cheers, shouts, gasps, but at the center of it all, Trump and Denzel sat locked in a stare that felt like it could shatter glass. Trump leaned forward, his voice straining to sound commanding, but the cracks were obvious. You sit there with your smug look, thinking you represent the people. But you're Hollywood, Denzel. You don't speak for real Americans. You speak for elites who clap while working folks suffer. Denzel tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His words hit harder in their stillness. Real Americans? You mean the same working people you left stranded when their factories shut down, when their health care disappeared, when their kids went hungry? You had the power to help, and instead you gave them slogans and rallies. You don't speak for them, Mr. Trump. You use them. The audience roared, their reaction like a wave crashing against Trump's words. The host shifted uncomfortably, sensing the storm growing, but he couldn't look away either. Trump's face hardened, his hands gripping the edge of the desk as if it were the last defense. That's a lie, he shouted. I gave them pride. I gave them a voice when no one else would listen. Denzel leaned in closer, his voice colder now, deliberate, sharp as a knife. You gave them noise. But noise fades. Pride without progress is empty. A voice without action is just an echo. And every time they needed more than applause, you weren't there. You turned their faith into your fuel. And when it burned out, you left them in the dark. The silence that followed wasn't weakness, it was weight. The audience felt it, the host felt it, even Trump felt it. He tried to recover, waving his hand dismissively, but his voice cracked as he forced a laugh. You don't know what it takes to be president. You don't know the deals, the threats, the... Denzel cut him off, his voice booming just enough to silence the room. I know leadership doesn't mean leaving your country divided, bleeding, and exhausted while you walked away richer. You call yourself a leader. I call you what you are, a disaster. The studio shook with applause, half the crowd on their feet. Cameras zoomed in on Trump's face, red, shaken, a man suddenly aware that for once, he wasn't the one holding the stage. Trump leaned back in his chair, forcing a smirk to mask the storm brewing behind his eyes. His fingers drummed nervously on the desk, but his voice came out loud and biting. You act like you've got all the answers, Denzel. But you've never carried the weight of this office. You don't know what it means to fight off enemies, to be the only one standing between America and chaos. You don't know pressure. You don't know sacrifice. The audience waited for Denzel's reply, and when it came, it was like a blade cutting through glass. He leaned forward, his hand resting firmly on the desk, eyes locked on Trump. Sacrifice? Don't talk to me about sacrifice. Sacrifice is every soldier who came home in a flag-draped coffin while you tweeted insults from a golf course. Sacrifice is every nurse who worked 16-hour shifts during a pandemic while you stood at podiums downplaying the crisis. Sacrifice is every family that lost everything while you bragged about your ratings. Gasps erupted across the studio. Trump's smile faltered, his jaw tightening as he tried to interrupt, but Denzel didn't give him room. His voice carried an edge that forced everyone to listen. Pressure isn't sitting in the Oval Office making deals for yourself. Pressure is a single mom wondering how she's going to feed her kids because her factory closed. Pressure is a young man working 2 jobs just to afford insulin. And while they carried that weight, you turned their struggle into sound bites. You cashed in on their pain. The audience was split, some cheering wildly, others frozen in stunned silence. Trump slammed his hand on the desk, the sharp crack silencing the crowd for a moment. That's not true. Nobody has done more for this country than me. Nobody. Denzel's reply was ice cold. You're right about one thing. Nobody has done what you did. Nobody has left this country angrier, weaker, and more divided than you. And history won't call that leadership. It'll call it shame. The crowd erupted, louder than before, the sound so fierce it drowned out Trump's attempt to respond. For the first time, the man who built his career on commanding attention was being swallowed by it. Trump stood up suddenly, breaking the frame of the cameras, his voice rising to a shout. You sit there, pretending to be some moral compass, but you're an actor, Denzel. An actor. You play heroes on screen, but in the real world? You're nothing. People elected me, not you. That means I speak for America, not some Hollywood star looking for applause. The audience gasped at his fury, some jeering, others clapping nervously, but all waiting for Denzel's next move. Calmly, Denzel straightened in his chair, never raising his voice, letting silence become his weapon before he struck. You're right, I'm an actor. I've spent my life portraying the struggles, the triumphs, the stories of ordinary people. But here's the difference, Mr. Trump, when the cameras stop rolling, I don't walk away from those stories. I carry them. I live them. And unlike you, I don't sell them out for profit. The roar of the crowd echoed, chants starting to bubble up from the back rows. Trump's face reddened deeper, his hands cutting the air in frantic gestures. You don't know the first thing about running a country. You wouldn't last a day in my shoes. Denzel leaned forward, his tone sharp enough to slice through the noise. In your shoes? You mean the ones built on bankruptcies, broken promises, and hush money? The ones that stepped over working people while you padded your own empire? No, Mr. Trump. I wouldn't last a day in your shoes, because I wouldn't wear them. The audience exploded, cheers, whistles, even a few standing ovations. The host tried desperately to regain control, his voice trembling as he urged the crowd to settle down. But the momentum was unstoppable. Cameras zoomed in on Trump, who looked rattled, his lips pressed into a thin line as though holding back the fury boiling inside. Denzel didn't flinch. He raised his hand slightly, steady and firm, and added, "America doesn't need another showman selling fear. It needs leaders who remember this country belongs to the people, not their ego, not their dynasty, not their brand." The chant began now, clear, rolling through the studio like thunder, Denzel. Denzel. Trump raised both hands, trying to silence the crowd, his voice breaking through the chants. "This is what I mean. Chaos. Division. You rile people up, and they scream your name like you're some kind of savior. But you're not. You're dangerous. You'd tear this country apart if anyone ever listened to you." His words were meant to steady the room, but instead, they fueled it. Boos erupted, clashing with cheers, the studio becoming a battlefield of sound. Denzel remained seated, unmoved, his gaze cutting through Trump's bluster like a blade through paper. Slowly, deliberately, he spoke, "You want to talk about division? Look in the mirror. Division is children separated from their parents at the border. Division is mocking the disabled on national TV. Division is calling violence very fine people on both sides. That's not leadership. That's cowardice wrapped in a suit." The crowd gasped, the weight of his words settling like a storm cloud. Trump slammed his fist on the table again, the sound echoing. "Coward? I stood against China, I stood against NATO freeloaders, I stood against every critic who said America couldn't win again." Denzel leaned in, his voice razor-sharp, his body language calm but commanding. "Standing against the world doesn't make you brave. It makes you isolated. It makes you reckless. True courage isn't about puffing your chest and shouting the loudest. True courage is standing for the people who have no voice. And every time you had the chance, you chose yourself instead." The audience roared in approval, some even chanting, "Tell the truth," over and over, drowning out Trump's attempts to respond. The host looked helpless, glancing at the producers offstage, but no one dared cut away. The spectacle was too electric, too raw. Trump, red-faced, jabbed a finger toward Denzel. "You think you can lecture me about courage? You hide behind scripts and cameras. I faced mobs, investigations, the fake news, and I'm still here." Denzel's answer was quiet, almost whisper-like, but powerful enough to pierce through the chaos. "Still here doesn't mean still right. It just means America hasn't finished holding you accountable yet." The crowd erupted again, louder than before. Even the cameras shook slightly as the chant returned, "Denzel. Denzel." The studio was no longer just a set, it felt like an arena. The chants of "Denzel. Denzel" shook the rafters, forcing the host to raise his hands in vain. Trump, face flushed, leaned across the desk, his fingers stabbing the air like a weapon. "You think you've won because a few people are clapping? You think shouting slogans makes you a hero? You'll fade tomorrow. I'll still be the headline. I'll still be the name." Denzel didn't move at first. He let the silence draw out, his calm demeanor becoming louder than Trump's rage. Then, he leaned forward, his voice steady, each word carrying the weight of conviction. "Headlines don't make history. Actions do. And when people look back, they won't see a leader in you, they'll see a cautionary tale. They'll see a man who chose power over principle, ego over country." The crowd hushed, hanging on every syllable. Even Trump seemed momentarily stunned, his mouth half open, unable to fire back. Denzel pressed on. "You call me an actor? Fine. But at least I never pretended to be something I'm not. You sold the American people a performance, Mr. Trump. And now the mask is cracking." The audience erupted again, some cheering, some gasping, but this time the noise had a different energy. It wasn't just excitement. It was recognition, the kind that lingers long after the cameras stop rolling. Trump's attempt at a retort faltered, his voice drowned by the growing chant, "Truth. Truth. Truth." The host, visibly overwhelmed, finally stood. We need to go to a break," he stammered, but the cameras didn't cut. The control room knew they were witnessing lightning in a bottle. Denzel leaned back at last, adjusting his blazer, unbothered by the chaos around him. He glanced at Trump one last time and delivered the line that would dominate every headline by morning: "America deserves better than a disaster dressed as a leader." The studio froze, then exploded. The chants, the applause, the sheer electricity made it clear, this wasn't just another TV clash. It was a moment of truth, one etched into the memory of everyone watching live, and one destined to echo across every screen in the nation. Tonight, we saw more than a clash of egos. We saw the truth collide with denial. Denzel Washington didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His words cut sharper than any insult, reminding America that leadership is about integrity, not spectacle. Trump may have walked out red-faced, but what stayed with the audience was the echo of Denzel's final line: "America deserves better than a disaster dressed as a leader." And maybe, just maybe, that echo will outlast the noise.